Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Ventures with Kurt Seafried and Jim Revis. They are cybersecurity professionals, and we actually take a little bit of a detour in this episode to talk about the philosophy of the utopian vision of Web 1, problems that happen with Web 2, where we're heading with Web 3 with regard to just how innovation, how data, how security, how privacy is going to play out as we approach the future here. And so they were kind enough to give their insights and background and history so that we can collectively, as innovators, as people building startups, as people investing in the future, we can think about how to craft a future that we all want to live in. So if you are watching this episode, you can also listen anywhere that you get your podcasts. You can just search for Ventures. And if you're listening, you can also watch by visiting wclittle.com, and there you'll see more extensive show notes to the things that we talk about today. So with that, please enjoy this conversation with Jim and Kurt. All right, Jim, Kurt, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's great to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. Jim, would you mind starting us off? We had a sequence of conversations about cybersecurity. A number of people are interested, both from a founder perspective and just those that are that are experts in the industry that are interested to learn more about the two of you. So would you mind just telling us a little bit about your background and what you're up to now?
Yeah, absolutely. So Jim Revis here. I'm currently CEO of Cloud Security Alliance. I like to say I've been in cybersecurity for about 36 years. The experience in college, when I was a junior in computer science at Western Washington University, they actually had access to what they were, I think it was NSFNet. It wasn't called Internet, I think specifically, but it was my first observation of the usage of the Internet. And it was used to connect to a research facility to download a program which would allow you to change the dates on object code. And the purpose of that was that computer science students could wait on a computer science assignment until the professor assigned like the perfect code. They could go copy it, compile it, and then backdate it. And then magically they would get 100% score and an A on their computer science assignment. So basically I kind of learned at that point, which was like 1986, 1985, that the internet was something that was a source of evil and malicious activities. And so kind of from there, I've always been in tech, and I built a .com startup called Security Portal in the 90s, which was intended to be this largest community for cybersecurity professionals. We never called them cybersecurity then; it was always information security. And so .com, it went pretty well. It didn't last very long, but I met Kurt Seafried out of that, which was a great thing. But have been involved in just a ton of startups in cybersecurity and help mentoring them, advising them, growing them. And in 2009, I started Cloud Security Alliance, which is a global not-for-profit to build the security best practices for cloud computing and a lot of other what you would call next generation information technology. And the idea behind it is like, let's get ahead of it. A lot of the experiences I've had with cybersecurity people is that they're very afraid of new innovations. And for example, when Wi-Fi came into corporate enterprises, the big thing in security conferences is everybody get these little Wi-Fi detectors. So the idea was you could hunt them down and destroy them and throw them in the garbage. And that's just not a good way to like build relationships and help innovate in organizations. So the idea with Cloud Security Alliance, let's get ahead of it. Let's give the security teams tools so that they can actually thoughtfully embrace and be the leaders in organizations in helping drive innovation. And so it's grown into being, just a terrific organization. We have offices all around the world, chapters all around the world, and sort of considered to be that leader of the of the cloud security ecosystem, if you will. So that's got me, and I love to talk about all things cyber.
Nice, nice. Welcome. How about you, Kurt?
Similar story. So I was 17, and a friend introduced me to Linux, and I had a dial-up 9600 baud connection to the internet, and I realized after about 2 or 3 months of using it, I can connect to everything on the internet. Doesn't that mean they can connect to me? Yeah, that was kind of my reaction. So I started looking for security documentation, right? How do I lock down my system to prevent it from getting hacked or something? And back then, it didn't exist. So I started writing some. The Linux Administrator's Security Guide, which is now laughably out of date. You know, it's 26, 25 years old. Talks about stuff like inetd, you know, things that haven't existed for 10 or 15 years at this point. And that's actually how I met Jim. He was running Security Portal, needed a writer, and I started writing. And I think after, 5 or 6 months, ended up full-time contract. And I haven't looked back since then. I've been consistently, you know, a Linux, Windows, Mac OS kind of guy. And what I find really fascinating is the IT industry is about automation and moving forwards, and yet so many people in it hate change. You know, like Linux users in systemd, half of them want to burn it down. And I remember when I saw cloud computing about 12 years ago, and it just made so much sense to me, right? This whole industrialization of IT, no more handcrafted artisanal IT, but, you know, we're going to just rent time on servers because that's what I want. I don't actually want to run servers. I've done that. It's no fun. They break at 3 a.m. And then you have to drive out to the colo in the snow and fix them. And same thing with blockchain. I look at blockchain and we see the system that allows people to define reality, consensus, what data goes in, how we use the data. It allows people to create new markets with people that they don't necessarily trust. Traditionally, we've done that through trusted third parties, or essentially the classic, I'm going to sue you to death if you annoy me. That's hugely inefficient, and blockchain allows for these efficient markets to be created. And, you know, we're seeing the dot-com explosion of blockchain right now, right? I mean, we're seeing so much creative destruction, and it's going to, you know, settle down in a few years. But so my interest is always at this sort of the cutting edge meets normal people. Right. I mean, I remember actually my first experience with Wi-Fi was at the Vancouver airport. They were renting Wi-Fi PCMCIA cards, and for those of you that don't know what that is, it's like a physical card you jam into your laptop to, you know, give it a hard drive or a modem or a whatever. And they would either rent it to you for like $20 an hour with internet, or you could buy it for like 100 and something. And with the amount of time I was spending in this airport, I was like, oh, I'll just buy one. And so I started using Wi-Fi there. Which was great because, you know, I had a 1 hour, 2 hours waiting for my flight, and all of a sudden I was productive. And so I thought Wi-Fi was amazing. Then I actually tried to buy some Wi-Fi gear for my house, and wow, that was terrible back in the day. And so I love this point where technology goes from sort of being theoretical and painful to something our parents can use and actually get benefit from. And not all technologies make that step. You know, we've seen a lot of technologies crash and burn, but I really like to see these technologies take off, get used by normal people, and more importantly, you know, be safe, right? Don't make the world worse. Like, I'm not going to pick on anybody in particular, but, you know, social media, for example, there's some real downsides.
Yeah.
You know, and so my interest is around how do we make this safe? How do we make this efficient? How do we make this useful? You know, how do we get normal people to get benefit from this?
I'm curious to get both of your perspectives. You know, in previous episodes, we've talked about kind of the principles of cybersecurity tips for founders and individuals, cybersecurity implications for the Web3 era, and we've gone into kind of the particulars. I'd like to go a little more philosophical, if I may, with the two of you, and maybe because you were both part of this journey. What was the original like utopian vision philosophically for Web 1, right? Like all these protocols were being developed, and you kind of see where I'm going to go into Web 3 here. But I want to just take a pause and reflect a little bit on what was going on in the original development of the internet. And obviously, as cybersecurity individuals, curious from your perspectives from that angle. But if you could riff a little bit on that, I'm genuinely curious.
Well, I'll start first. I was pretty fascinated by Kurt saying he's like really interested in this intersection of technology and normal people, because I don't know how Kurt even knows what a normal person is. But,
I have a reference model.
okay, for reference. Leaving that aside, so I think that it's been common for so much of the history of computers and technology is the designers and developers of the technology, and then by extension, the designers and developers of the standards governing internet and Web 1.0, is that the technology is going to be used as intended. And so you design things in that way, and that tells you, well, of course, someone is not going to, where you're supposed to put in a phone number, they're not going to put in letters. That's just not going to happen, because that's not how I wrote the code. And so essentially, and there was historically debates on hey, security is going to be an issue and we need to be thinking more about that, but it's just a low priority. Hey, this is going to be used for maybe a more limited environment. Maybe it's really going to be more for universities sending research papers back and forth. And so, and I think a lot of us live our lives that way, that we kind of live sort of oblivious to the dragons and the dangers around us. And it's usually something bad needing to happen, which you could say for this, it was maybe the Morris worm in 1988, where a student researcher was messing around with the total lack of security that was built into the standards and the early technology, and created a worm that basically brought the internet down at that small time. So that was the thinking, and it's not necessarily the thinking everywhere in all technology. I think we've definitely learned a lot, but there still is a big challenge of that. And if you think from an entrepreneurial perspective, you do think a lot about, hey, the features that the customers want, not necessarily securing it. And so that's where it's really important to think that in this very interconnected compute as a service world, you got to think about trust being a lot of what you're selling for whatever product you're making. So I don't know if the very normal Kurt Seifried has a view on that.
Well, one thing I find fascinating is we've long ago crossed the bridge of complexity, where we now have emergent behaviors that nobody could have predicted in these systems. I remember when Amazon came out, and I'm like, so the business plan is you sell stuff at a loss, but you make up for it with volume. Like, what? and now I literally spend a couple $100 a month on Amazon because, well, stuff just shows up quickly.
Right.
And there are so many cases of this. Security Portal was a great example, right? Here was a relatively small group of people punching way above their weight, and against, for example, the traditional publishing industry, because we had a really good website, right? People came to us. Back in the day, we got Slashdotted. We had hundreds of thousands of people coming through the site on a weekly basis, which, a print magazine would have killed for those numbers. Mm-hmm. And so I just love that all these things that nobody could even have imagined, somebody, takes A and plugs it into B and to C and to Z and comes up with, a smartphone, right? All these emergent technologies that need an ecosystem, right? We need better batteries, we need better CPU, better GPU, better internet, right? Like I now have gigabit fiber optic at my house for less than $100 US a month. Right, that's like 10 years ago. That was literally unthinkable, and 20 years ago, it was not physically possible, no matter how much money I had. And from a security point of view, that complexity. I mean, on the one hand, we have traditional technical security, which we're terrible at. People keep writing source code in C and making memory allocation errors because it's really hard. But even worse now, especially in the blockchain world, we have people making business decisions that it turns out, things like the miner extractor value and flash bots can, I don't want to say rip people off because they're not technically breaking the rules, but like money is going to places it wasn't meant to. So I guess that's an attack. Like, I'm not even sure if it's bad or illegal, or if it's just like a sharp trading strategy. You know, it's so complicated that I literally can't tell you if it's good or bad. It's something that's we didn't anticipate, in the system originally, and well, we're stuck with it. And that to me is the most fascinating thing, is these emergent behaviors. And conversely, we have emergent, security. We have new capabilities that, I have a biometric door lock. I don't have to worry about my kids losing their keys. Right? That's lovely. Little kids they lose things all the time. Things like Face ID. All these things that make it more accessible for normal people. Right? People who maybe can't type can, like, I just sit in front of my computer, the camera sees me, and I hit any key on the keyboard, and I'm logged in. I don't have to be able to type or remember a password to get into my computer. And so I love that the technology, it's things we can't even imagine 5 years down the road. And it's wonderful. And it's also conversely a little scary. You hear stories of, new scams, people being ripped off in new ways. And, my ultimate goal with all of this is to reduce those pain points and to make it safer by default for people. And I think we're slowly beginning to realize that as an industry. And, we're not blaming the user as much as we used to, right? 20 years ago, it was all about, the user made a mistake. They did something bad. That's why the security incident happened, right? And now we're taking more the tact of, like, why did we let the user run with scissors? Maybe we should have given them like a padded case for them, and made it safe.
So what happened? So coming into the Web 1 to Web 2 transition, what happened that created this, what I feel the Web 2 has now jumped the shark and has created a hot mess for us geopolitically, individually, et cetera, et cetera. Why did that happen? Like, what were the ideals and the philosophy of Web 1 that created and enabled all of the things that happened in Web 2?
I would say economics, right? There's incentives, and to put it simply, if there's two organizations and one organization does something that makes them a lot of money, whether or not it's ethical or moral, and organization two takes the high road and doesn't make a lot of money, chances are organization one is going to win.
I'd also add, I think, like the ability for so many people to be able to have access to the tools of, essentially manufacturing technology, more from a software perspective, that you can create applications of any type. Almost anyone can do that. In theory, that's really good. In practice, it can be really bad, because everyone can create their own sort of standard, and then you kind of lose control of a lot of the organizing principles. And I think some of the interesting things for me was first seeing this sort of application security space, where we used to think about security as more of this network address, and hey, I'm this bank, and so this bank is whatever 10 dot whatever, and we're going to give access to these different IP addresses, and then but on top of that, there's so many layers of different things. Well, what are you going to do with that? You're doing like a money transfer, or is it actually pornography, or all these other things? And so the tools to allow anyone to do anything basically means you create a mirror of the entire non-digital world on the digital world. And so that's where you get the mess. It's basically, you put a mirror to the physical world, you see homeless people out there, you see crime, you see pollution, you see wars, and well, that all makes its way onto the internet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I remember I was a web developer and digital marketer in the 2000s, and back then they gave us all the data. I mean, Google gave us all the search queries. We could identify people and get to know them in a very spooky and scary, in a very intrusive way. And I realized that there's a lot of responsibility I have dealing with this amount of data. And I remember the early days of developing on LinkedIn, developing with Facebook data, developing with Twitter data. And, the Cambridge Analytica thing came years later. Like, they were just giving us all their friends' data. And I just remember thinking, if I had nefarious intentions. I could be getting away with a lot right now, and it almost felt like nobody was watching. Like there's nobody governing me. There's no regulatory bodies, and in a lot of sense, there almost kind of still isn't. All that's happened is there's been now coming back to economics. There's been public pressure on all these Web2 companies that they're worried about their stock price, essentially. That this now, and then the government is trying to regulate, but the politicians have no idea how to regulate this stuff. I mean, for the two of you as cybersecurity pros the last 10, 15 years, how have you thought about governing bodies, regulatory? How do we keep people safe or not? Do we just free market and let whatever happens happens? I don't know, how do the two of you think about that?
So my view is definitely the idea of risk management, which is just inherent in every single person, in existence, and more of that, and where it can be codified by government and regulatory bodies, that's great. But I see so many regulations that have so many unintended consequences that I think, like, understanding, and you can do neat things with enough technology, enough instrumentation. It's not like every person needs to go assess every risk. You can actually defer that or outsource that to a group of people or data analytics that can help you navigate things. But I think ultimately it's a government approach is too slow, and it tends to try to prevent the last thing that happened versus the thing that's going to happen in the future.
Right.
And in terms of issues with Web 2.0 and big tech, wherever you want to talk about that, I really hold the most promise in the problem solving happening through innovation and startups. The thing about the technology giants is they're very vulnerable to any new innovation, because we're so used to doing very fast technical refreshes now that I view it to like waves in the ocean. You miss a wave, you can catch another one. Where in the old days, where if it was years between upgrades, maybe 1 or 2 software updates a year, it was very hard to see. Those things are very sticky and enduring. But I think we're still in this very wild west where we could come up with completely new social networks that were blockchain based, completely private or privacy oriented, different ways of changing like the advertising model, which leads to so much of the data acquisition and analysis. We could change a lot of those things pretty quickly, but I think it's going to be more through innovation that does that and secures it. It ends up being sort of this coalition of the willing. Everyone's got to play a role. So yeah, government needs to play a role, corporations need to play a role, innovators need to play a role, individual citizens. But I look to the innovators to actually have the best sort of bang for the buck on that.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, to me, it boils down to there's really two kinds of companies. The companies that are innovative, and that is especially tough for existing companies. I mean, it's easy to be a startup and be innovative because by definition, you're new.
Right.
And then there's the companies that will fight tooth and nail, to protect their existing business models. And we see that with regulation, right? You can write really good modern regulation, and these companies will just engineer around it, right? GDPR is my favorite example where, as far as I can tell, nothing major for the major big boys changed, right? Everybody else had to put cookie warnings on their site, which I find super annoying. And regulation is hard, but I do think it is part of the answer. But like Jim said, it really boils down to innovation. Somebody's going to come along and they're going to make something better, more privacy oriented, like Signal, or an entirely new thing that I can't even fathom. I look at the way my kids interact with and use their, iPads and computers, and they do stuff that I don't know that I fully understand what it is they're doing. Like, I see what they're doing, but for example, socially, it's different than how I interacted with the computer, because what they're doing didn't exist. With these virtual worlds that just, with you can build these games in these virtual worlds and have teams and have, like Among Us. I don't get why it's so popular, but it's popular. Like, it's a huge thing with these kids, and Part of it is I sometimes wonder if, it's like alien life. Will we even recognize it if we meet it?
Mm,
And I can't help but wonder, with some of these companies, are they sort of already doing better security, better privacy, and we don't even really realize it?
mm. Well, what would better security, better privacy look like right now?
I have no idea.
No,
No, I honestly, I think a lot about
yeah.
what is privacy: privacy of thought, privacy of action, privacy of behavior, privacy of speech, communications. I don't know what these mean anymore, right? Because we can't not carry cell phones. The cell phone companies will sell our anonymized, tracking data because, for example, I want to know if the roads are congested or not. You know, I don't know what privacy is anymore because it's so complicated. One of my favorite examples is a lot of cities have put on, GIS mapping data of various things, including crime statistics. And what they found in some higher end neighborhoods, people will not report crime anymore because they don't want to drive down their property values.
Mm.
They would rather eat the loss of a couple $1,000s of a break in than report a burglary that now is permanently in the record. And so when somebody's, house shopping and looking at this crime data, well, do you want to live in a crime-ridden neighborhood or the one with no crimes?
Huh. Wild. Wild. Okay.
Right? And
Well,
and
yeah.
when I say it out loud, that's like, oh, that totally makes sense. But if you ask me, Kurt, what's one of your concerns with the, publicly mapping crime data? I wouldn't have come up with that because I'm not an economist.
Well, I would say, on um, cybersecurity that, the fact, and Kurt was talking about this with cloud, it's not everybody doing artisan IT, is there's real opportunities, much better opportunities for sharing like the best practices and having like big cloud providers already do a fair amount of a security foundation that a business doesn't need to worry about. They still need to worry about security, but it ends up being at layers related to applications that are more closely related to their business. So it helps us all sort of narrow and make security more relevant to the specific things we care about. So it's part of this that whole network effect and greater knowledge that allows us to potentially behave more. The challenge is we don't really have a model for how technology is so pervasive and integrated into our lives and monitoring us and omnipresent that and the immersion. We don't really understand how that's rewiring humanity and our interactions, and so that's the thing that sort of concerns me. I think again we've got foundation, we've got an ability to share and create better cybersecurity, but it's that future and those black swan events and just sort of waking up 10 years from now and say, oh, my god, like why didn't we see this happening? And it's like it's all part of us now. So that's my concern.
Yeah. So for Web 2, if one, I'd just be curious if you feel like the transition from Web 2 to Web 3 is already happening, is far off, because in Web 2 we placed a lot of trust into all of these relatively small set of large companies, and from my perspective, it seems like that trust has been broken. Our data has been breached. It's the mental health with people interacting with these Web 2 companies has been in decline, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe the younger generations don't feel the same way, but it feels like that there is a radical transition happening right now without a lot of people realizing it. But it may be that I'm just heavily in blockchain Web3 circles, and I'm listening to futurists that that are skewing my perception of reality. So for the two of you and your perspectives, where do you think we're at in that journey?
I'm going to let the normal guy go first.
So I'm going to cheat. I'm going to quote William Gibson: "The future is already here. It's just not very evenly distributed."
Mm.
And this whole COVID thing has been a great example of that. Most people didn't have really good internet, which was fine if you're just streaming Netflix or browsing the web once in a while. But when you have 2 or 3 children trying to do online video conferencing at the same time, yeah, I know a lot of rural people who've had to upgrade their internet
Mm,
because they can only get one video stream, maybe. And it's not an option to not have your kid go to school, right? You need to have that happen, right? I've worked from home for 23 years, so I'm lucky. Like, we had a really built out IT, infrastructure here.
hmm
And I think that's part of the challenge is the future isn't evenly distributed, and you'll find pockets like blockchain was hot among a very small group of people a long time ago,
Right.
and and then it metastasized and became public. And I try to keep an eye on these small groups, but the problem is there's hundreds and thousands of these small weird groups doing all sorts of strange things. 3D printing, I'm still not sure additive manufacturing is going to be like, it's a big deal, but I'm not sure it's going to. I don't know that we're going to get flying cars out of it, but we might get a 10% better lifestyle,
Mm,
right? And that's the other challenge is some things just. I put in a motion sensor light switch in my garage, and now, because obviously if you go into your garage, you're going to want to turn the light on when you go into the garage, right? So you don't run into stuff. And that little light switch sensor motion has been a huge quality of life addition because I'm
mm,
always carrying stuff in or out of the garage, and I don't have to flick a light switch now. Where does that sort of fit in? It's definitely not as cool as blockchain, but it's literally something I use multiple times every day.
Yeah, I mean, what scares me is it's really not so much. I think we get too focused on, hey, it's these big companies that maybe are watching us or monitoring us, but fundamentally, we've gotten to a space where there is really no scarcity, and you can literally you have an overabundance of anything that is going to drive your motor as a child, an adult, an addiction or a virtuous thing that you want to do. And you can just get so focused on that the idea of sort of of shared cultures is something that I'm really concerned that really gets fragmented by all of this, and frankly don't have like really good solutions for that. And we, again, in our business, you got to see the bad things happen, and then you fix them. And we're not as predictive as I wish we could be. But that's really what concerns me. And I mean, there's the easy ones. You can say, hey, people get radicalized doing this or that. And yeah, they probably do it anyway. But do you in the future, are you going to want to have a family, or would you rather have your virtual reality family? Because the kids always get straight A's, and there's never any problems, and any of those sorts of things. So that's where I think we need to figure out how we can work with both the technology, the giants we have, and the future, to see how we can sort of create between these silos. We can create some pipes between them and sort of build back some of that shared culture. But I don't want this company or that company to tell me what that shared culture is.
mm,
Yeah, and I do worry about that because, again, some of these companies are now hiring psychologists to drive quote unquote user engagement, which is to get people using the site more and more to unhealthy degrees. And humans we're pretty easy to fool
yeah.
in some ways, right? Like, we have threat models and risk models and thinking based on how we evolved thousands of years ago. Yeah, like the attention economy, right? 200 years ago there was not 1,000 TV channels, and now my son will see something on YouTube and want me to find it for him, and I'm like, uh, you know, okay, you want the thing with the red car? Like, we'll try, but I can't guarantee I'm going to find it.
Yeah. So I've heard a lot of rumblings recently about self-sovereign identity. This future that we are going to have on our phones, or yeah, probably, or on some kind of card or device. The keys to our own data, credentialed against authoritative sources, that yes, we are educated here. Yes, these health records are legit. These licenses for driving, et cetera, this ownership of this property or asset, and on and on and on. Um, Is that going to be a thing? Is that a good thing from a cybersecurity perspective? I'm an optimist, and I'm really excited about even things like not having to mess around with moving around my healthcare data and just kind of having my own ownership over it. But is that, from your perspectives? A lot of people have been talking about it. Is that going to be a thing, or is this still way far off, or is there some flaw in it?
I believe that's going to be a thing because, for one, the technology is very accessible for us to be able to go do that. The idea of businesses issuing your identity is it's ludicrous, but it's also not even something that those organizations really want to do. It's
Yeah.
really more we issue those identities because we need to protect our assets. But now that we have all of the technologies available so that we can federate or we can connect to people bringing their own identities and determine what they have access to, it fits also that sort of economic model because then, if you're a very large social network and you can automatically connect to all those identities, it's actually a bigger market. You don't have to issue the identity first. So I think it's going to work out, and I think blockchain and Bitcoin are some sort of examples. There's a lot of other drivers, obviously, about how a lot of that ecosystem is possible. So I think it's important, and yet you should own your identity. That makes sense. It doesn't make any sense that other people would issue that. What they need to do is say, hey, maybe there is a aspect of your persona related to your identity that is very relevant to our business, or you're in the military or whatever else. But I think that that's definitely something that's coming, and we probably won't get it right for a couple tries, but I think absolutely that's something we're going to see.
Hmm.
My suspicion with this space is that it's going to end up being less about control of your identity and more about the ease of proving things. So, a perfect example is I pull up my driver's license and show it to you. How do you know it's valid? Right? You could show me your passport, and I'm going to assume it's an American passport. I believe it's blue with an eagle on the front.
Right.
Right? Like, I don't know. Like, I'd have to look up a web page and find out how to verify this. And even then, it could be fake. And I see so much effort put into, like, how much time do people spend getting transcripts so that they can prove I have this degree or I finished high school or I whatever, right? If that could be turned into a 5-second operation, it would save thousands of hours and years of effort.
Right.
Um, Things like medical records. Like I live in Canada, so I live in a province. We have a centralized healthcare record system, and my understanding is America doesn't.
Right. Right.
I cannot imagine what that's like. Like I literally cannot imagine what that's like. Things like I have a bunch of different licenses. I have like a boating license. Again, how do I prove that? Short of the police officer having access to that database and being able to validate my date of birth and my name and my driver's license and my boating license and this and that. Because when you think about how much time do companies spend trying to figure out who they're dealing with and whether or not this person actually is like I love that globally there's 4 Kurt Siefrieds and we all work in IT. Right? We're all about the same age and we roughly look the same. I love it because I thought it was a rare name. No, there's 4 of us, let alone poor John Smith.
Some
Right.
cloning experiment went awry, unfortunately.
Yeah, pretty much. And so when you look at how much time and effort people spend trying to, every real estate transaction, how much time do you spend having to prove identity so that it doesn't end up being a scam? When you go in for medical treatment, hopefully they do know who you are and whether or not you're allergic to penicillin, because like that's important.
Well,
That
I
really
think that's
matters.
authentication. I mean, authentication is like just a super difficult challenge. I like the FIDO Alliance and what they're doing, and I've talked about them before. But if you think of, like, for example, like affinity programs, like you're a frequent flyer, you're like the highest tier status, and you have this special phone number and all that. The reason they have that is they actually realize that the systems that they have for the normal travelers, the normal customers, are so awful that they have to create these special areas for the high net worth or the very important customers. I mean, everybody should be treated like an important customer and have those systems. But I think it's definitely authentication is that problem. I think we can really solve that. But definitely, I think crypto is like just an important part, I think, of how we're going to be proving ourselves in the future. And so when quantum computing really comes to the fore, then there'll probably be billions of Kurt Siegfrieds because, he'll be able to destroy all our crypto.
Right. Yeah. Well, that'll be an interesting future. So then, okay. So the future that we're heading toward is one where we can instantly prove, right, that there's trust that is able to be proved quickly to save
and efficiently
to be able to save time and money that will open up all kinds of new innovation opportunities, right?
Well, like the fax machine, right? You went from sending paperwork via post, taking days or weeks, to minutes, right? And I've seen many blockchain cases. Italy's my favorite. Italy had banking regulations written in the 70s that said for banks to exchange data had to be on tape. So for them to settle transactions would take upwards of 30, 40, 50 business days between banks. Then they went to a blockchain and that went down to minutes. Right. So these things that crush latency, they're not amazing, and you and I aren't going to directly see them. But when you're like, to take a check from America used to take 30 business days to clear in Canada. That's a month and a half. That's insane, right? And getting that down to minutes makes cash flow positions for businesses totally different. Some businesses that would have died survived because cash flow, and that's the kind of thing where we won't necessarily like see the next Facebook, but all of a sudden everybody spends less time trying to dig out old paperwork or get copies of their birth certificate or whatever.
So what is the next? I'm curious from your perspectives, from a data, cybersecurity, and even just philosophically, what is the next Facebook social network? People communicating with each other online in light of self-sovereign identity, in light of data being out there in various layers of chains. What do you see? I mean, I guess I'm asking you to be a little futuristic here, but like, where do you see things heading?
So I don't see companies sort of owning the social media platform as much as something like a blockchain community that has these direct connections, and we evolve more towards very interesting sort of outposts and places that people like to go. But again, they choose what they want to do, what they want to share, to where they want to share it, to where they want to go. And I think that can be very exciting and interesting when you think about it that way. And that you just sort of there's a lot of sort of specialization that we've seen with cloud takes hold. It's like, okay, I don't focus on all that part of the stack. I focus on this or I focus on that. And if you sort of get out of the business of issuing identities and you controlling all of that, and you really more compete on like the services that are unique and differentiated that other people want, that I think that has a real possibility of making things a lot better. And again, it's just going to be a lot more rapid innovation, from the cybersecurity perspective, and I think thinking about it from like a startup entrepreneurial perspective, we're going to continue to be chasing our tail, having really good proactive things where we can implement them, take advantage of this network effect. But security people think a lot about layers when they're securing things. And you unlock one door, then you got to unlock the other one, you got to do that. And then if something's broken, you got to get the fire extinguisher, you got to do whatever else. And so, entrepreneurs that do a very good sort of narrow job at solving a security problem, putting a layer on there, and then from that, they may expand out to much larger areas. I think that's going to continue to be what we're going to see. And I see like really big companies, big banks, whatever, they'll go buy products from they'll be the first product, the first buyer, the first customer all the time, because they recognize from that risk management perspective, hey, here's a gap that I have. No one in the industry solves that gap, so I will take anyone that can go do that for a amount of time. And that's where we get, everybody's predicted our industry, hey, it would get consolidated. It never has done that, but there's churn. Companies build that unique solution, they grow, they get acquired, the serial entrepreneur, then they go create the next one. And cybersecurity is just going to always create sort of that environment. That window is always going to be open to create the next thing.
Mm.
Yeah, I think building on that, I think what we're seeing a lot more now in tech is these mashups. So rather than me having to build a full stack and kind of control everything, I'm going to build a mashup. For example, I'm going to build a blockchain that lets you integrate your Facebook and LinkedIn profiles, because you can't do that right now. Like, why can't we do that? You know, why can't I integrate my Twitter and my Facebook, or my TikTok and my Twitter, or whatever, right? And with those mashups, depending on how they're built, they potentially will give the end users much more control over how that works and how that looks. And so my suspicion is we're going to sort of see a new type of IT that we don't necessarily recognize as IT. It's going to be maybe a WebSocket script that sort of coordinates a bunch of different websites into I'm going to use an old-fashioned term like a dashboard, but that's not going to be what my kids are using, And I think the way that they share data, and I don't mean just technologically sharing it like video or whatever file sharing platforms, but annotating data, commenting, liking, voting it up and down, right? We've seen that. We're going to see new riffs on that. Like I remember one coworker at one point talking about how his adopted daughter from the Ukraine was watching these Ukrainian pop videos at school, and apparently she's an influencer because she got the whole school, this is like outside of DC, into these Ukrainian pop videos, right? Like, and that was 10 years ago.
I love Ukrainian pop videos.
Yeah, and that was 10 years ago. Like that again, it's just it's so different and alien. I don't, I'm not sure I can even recognize it. And but I think these mashups, because we're seeing people build things with a speed and a cheapness that is just amazing.
Yeah. Right. All right. Well, last topic, and then just obviously where can people find you online? But maybe just end with, what are the questions or the projects that the two of you are thinking about right now? Maybe for next time we can dive into them. But just as a teaser for those listening in and watching, what are the question project things that you're working on, and where can people find you online?
Okay, so a project we're actually working on together is the idea of using blockchain to create what we call a pseudo cryptocurrency to measure people's education and knowledge and experience. And we think that's just very disruptive if you sort of think about it, that you can actually prove your knowledge, and we can actually improve education, and we give people credit not just for did they go to the right school, but are they actually the experts in an area, which there is no school to measure that. And so we think that's pretty disruptive. We're going to apply it to the cybersecurity industry for a lot of the credentialing that needs to happen there. And we think it can do good there. And we think there's a lot of other applications in creating sort of utilities because of the transparency. That's what's really exciting about blockchain to me, is it provides this sort of transparency. And you can find me at cloudsecurityalliance.org. Pretty easy to find there.
Yeah, and what Jim said, and one of the things I love the most about our project is that we also want to make it kind of open-ended usage, because we think we know kind of how people can use it to get value out of it. And I'm 99% certain there's 100 other ways people will figure it out. And we want to let them, whereas in past we've been like, no, you can't use it that way. That's wrong. No, we want to I hate to say let the market decide, but it really is let the market decide. In the last 20 years, the things we've seen the market decide on, some of it's been just flat out crazy, but hugely innovative, disruptive, and wonderful. And you can find me at the Cloud Security Alliance. And yeah, like I said, just this, how do we build things so that they're safe, so that they're useful, and so that they actually make life better?
Gentlemen, this has been great. Really appreciate your time.
Right. Thanks, Will.
Thank you.
Enjoyed it quite a bit.
Thank you.
All right, a couple quick things before you go. Number one, I have a general newsletter where I write about technology and startups and health science and teaching people to code. And I write about a variety of different subjects that we talk about on this show. So if you go to wclittle.com, there you'll be able to subscribe, and you'll also be able to subscribe to particular topics. If you're just interested in one or a few of them, you'll be notified right when I publish new content in those areas. Number two, my partners and I at Proto Ventures have a portfolio company called Startup Rocket. If you go to startuprocket.com, there you'll be able to receive coaching guides and customize an operations framework for you and your team and your advisors to be on the same page in terms of what is the appropriate next step for you in your entrepreneurial journey. And finally, if you wouldn't mind leaving a review anywhere that you have listened to this podcast or watched this podcast, it would be super helpful to help those who might be interested in consuming this content as well. Thank you.